A second playthrough of both Resident Evil Village and Evil Within 2 have convinced me of a few things. Good God, we need an Evil Within 3. Why do we not have a trilogy yet? Get Shinji Mikami on that shit, or John Johannes, or whoever, just do it. One of the biggest impressions I came away from both playthroughs with was the subtle but deep impact of perspective in survival horror games. The Evil Within 2 and Resident Evil Village are uniquely qualified for this comparison. Both games launched with a specific set viewpoint perspective, first person in Resident Evil Village and third person in The Evil Within 2, and later integrated a new playable perspective with post-launch patches and expansions, a third person view for Village and first person for The Evil Within 2. In both games, only the point of view was changed. No gameplay mechanics were altered, no change to weapons, enemies, map layouts, or anything else of note. Both games kept their original cinematics and cutscenes, preserving certain moments as they were originally experienced, but all or very nearly all gameplay segments, while functionally playing the same way, were now playable from an entirely new perspective. When playing both games from these fresh new perspectives, I expected the experience to be a bit novel perhaps, but largely unchanged. All that changes is the camera placement, and the absence or addition of the backside of an avatar, right? After a complete playthrough of both games under these altered POVs, and replaying a fair bit of them both again on their original perspectives, however, I have to say the effect of this POV shift had a noticeable impact on my experience of what is essentially the exact same game. Furthermore, this shift in my experience of the games based on which POV I was set in seemed to fairly well translate across both games in a consistent manner, regardless of which POV was the original and which was the new addition. Both The Evil Within 2 and Resident Evil Village were more fully immersive and intense when played from a first-person perspective. The already excellent atmosphere and ambiance is made even more prominent in first person. The horrible monstrosities chasing and attacking you are all the more immediate and visceral. Every horrific spectacle more in your face and unsettlingly close. Both games do a great job of making you feel in the action, in the moment, with Resident Evil Village especially shining in this area, with the way it incorporates body horror and many instances of conveying Ethan's body becoming injured or mutilated from that immediate and uncomfortably personal first-person point of view. The first-person perspective has a marked impact on the feel of gameplay as well. Every encounter feels much more claustrophobic. I always felt like the vile things trying to kill me were closer than I wanted them to be, looming right on top of me with little way to escape or run or make suitable distance. Every shot feels like it's made from panic and desperation rather than precision. The hostile closeness was consistent across both games, and I felt a difference in the sense of pressure that it really changed the whole tone of those playthroughs. There was a distinct dread in almost every fight and encounter that was markedly lacking during both games when I played in third person. A tension that had nothing to do with the enemy itself or how many supplies I had, but rather the simple feeling of never having enough distance and space from my attackers to fully feel comfortable fighting back. This discomfort tied me much closer to the horror elements of these survival horror games. It was the change in perspective and the claustrophobic, unrelenting pressure that really made both games shine as survival horror experiences. Playing Resident Evil Village and The Evil Within 2 in the first-person mode put me in mind of other iconic horror experiences such as Amnesia or Outlast. At first glance, it would seem as if the feeling of fear and horror in those titles wouldn't translate here. After all, a big component of the terror in those titles are your fundamental helplessness, unable to fight back or defend yourself against your attackers. But while it is true that some of the edge of that fear is dulled by the ability to fight and defeat your enemies in The Evil Within and Resident Evil, there is very much still this feeling of being relentlessly pursued and largely unable to get away or make actual physical distance between you and the killer crowding you, right in your face and ready to cut you to ribbons. That is eerily similar feeling to what makes those earlier horror classics so unnerving. The horrible things hunting you and doing their dastardly deeds upon your all too fragile flesh and bones are unpleasant and unsettling when addressed from a distance. But it's when they close the gap and suddenly fill your first-person view, crowding you and attacking in a frenzy, that things become truly terrifying. If you're looking for maximum scare factor, first person really is the obvious choice in either of these titles. After playing both games in the first-person POV, playing in third person feels like coming up for air. If I'm honest, I feel almost silly for how much more comfortable and less intense it feels to play either of these titles in third person. I suspect this is probably some kind of subconscious psychological phenomenon taking place right under the surface of my conscious awareness. Maybe because in third person I have an avatar and I can physically see Ethan Winters or Sebastian Castanelos doing battle with the monstrosities of a waking nightmare. I'm able to distance myself from the pants-shitting horror of it all. The avatar of these heroic, if certainly squishy and killable men remove me from the visceral element of having an 8-foot lumbering corpse with a buzzsaw for an arm so close to my face that I can smell the scent of carrion through the screen. The pulled back camera in third person perspective broadens and allows me the space to see more of my surroundings. This not only lowers the intensity of moment by moment battles, but also gives me a generally clearer line of sight and a better ability to land my shots. This seems counterintuitive given the normal superiority of aim in first person shooters, but for whatever reason I can hit a shot far more reliably in these games when in the third person mode. I also feel like I'm generally able to distance myself and get better positioning when the enemies begin to close in for the kill, which also eases the inevitable panic of having so much hostility directly in my face. Third person quite simply feels better to play. I feel less vulnerable, less pressured, and more competent overall. And I can't help but think that this is a strong testament of how deeply we as players invest ourselves into an experience based on point of view. The difference between first person and third person point of view can even have a strong impact on whether we like a character or not in the first place. That's part of a larger conversation that we'll be having in a video soon. Ethan Winters deserved better. So with all this said, which point of view makes for a better experience in each game? My answer is the same for both Resident Evil Village and The Evil Within 2, which is honestly, it depends on what you find more appealing about these games. If you prefer immersion and a sense of being fully within the game, first person is going to be the way to go, especially in the case of Village, where the strong inclusion of Ethan's hands and limbs play such a prominent part in interactions and the way the man is put through the brutal meat grinder of Village's many hazards. Likewise, if horror, tension, and a perceived vulnerability or danger is what you want from survival horror, then first person evokes those elements far better. On the other hand, if the feel of a game handling as smoothly as possible and having as much of a sense of control and agency as it can is high on your list of priorities, or you just want a more comfortable, if still thrilling experience, then third person is probably going to deliver more of what you're looking for. At the end of the day, regardless of which of these directions you lean in, both Resident Evil Village and The Evil Within 2 are some of the biggest standouts in the survival horror genre and well worth your time. So much so that, in my opinion, the very best way to experience these games is just to take the time to run through a playthrough in both perspectives. Although you will be replaying the same game, journeying through the same places, and tackling the same challenges, it's surprising how much the shift in perspective in both games can really breathe fresh air into a second playthrough. Now all that's left to have the ultimate experience in a dual point of view in survival horror games is to wait for Resident Evil 4 Remake to come out with a first-person view mode. I'm sure they'll put it out as soon as they figure out how to do a first-person suplex without giving the player motion sickness. But fuck it, a bit of queasiness is well worth it in order to suplex a village granny in first person. Make it happen, Capcom. Give the people, and by the people I mean me, what they need.